A Quinnipiac University poll finds 53% of GOP or GOP-leaning voters would support President Trump if the primary election was held today. 23% said that they would vote for Florida Governor Ron DeSantis. Joining me right now is former Arkansas Governor and former presidential candidate himself, Mike Huckabee. Mike, it's great to see you. Thanks so much for being here.
Great to be with you, Maria. Yeah, the field is growing, and heck, I may throw my hat in the ring before it's all over. And I'm just kidding. There is no way that I'll be back in the fray.
I was just watching you a commercial that you were doing about teaching kids about Donald Trump, and here we have Donald Trump still in the lead by a wide margin, even as a lot of people were predicting Ron DeSantis would cut into that lead. What's your take on where all of these candidates stand with Trump in the lead?
Donald Trump still owns the biggest space there, and I think he sucks all the oxygen out of the room. And every attempt that the Democrats and the deep state make to try to destroy him, it only makes him stronger. I mean, this is Wile E. Coyote versus Roadrunner, and the Acme bomb keeps blowing up in the face of the Democrats every time they try to launch a new one. And I don't know why they don't understand this. There are people who are tired of watching Sandy Berger stuff classified documents down his pants, Hillary Clinton bleach bidding a server she should never have had in her home, Joe Biden parking boxes next to his Corvette where Hunter comes and goes and does business with the Chinese, and Donald Trump has some documents. He was president. He was the only one of those people who had authority to ever have those documents. And yeah, there's some things in the indictment that sound troubling, but Maria, an indictment is the accusation that the prosecution puts out. We haven't heard the other side yet. And so even if everything in that indictment is true, it still does not rise to the level of a pre-dawn raid on his home and Melania's closet and all the things that this former president, has been put through.
Yeah, I mean, I think you make so many really great points, because isn't it true that in the Presidential Records Act, a president can take whatever he wants from the White House, and then once he's out of the White House, then what's left is National Archives? I mean, is it that's what President Trump is saying?
And it's been the practice. Bill Clinton had all these tapes of conversations that he had in his sock drawer, for heaven's sakes. He wasn't just keeping socks there.
And they wrote about that in the Journal, the op-ed, because the actual lawyer who was trying to get those tapes says, listen, if in fact this is the case that President Trump did something wrong, I want those tapes.
Yeah, exactly. And he was denied by a court the access to those tapes. And the whole point was, President Clinton had a right to take those because they were in his possession, and as president, he can do whatever he wants to with them. Now, if there was some evidence that Donald Trump had actually handed over sensitive documents to the Russians, to the Chinese, to anybody, that's a big deal. But there's no evidence that he did that.
Right.
And so the fact is, he has not been accused of somehow actually doing treason or espionage. And those are serious charges. I just think that the Justice Department has lost its mind in thinking that somehow this makes sense either legally or politically. And politically, it's only making Donald Trump stronger.
Yeah, Kayleigh, I just want to say the rules are different for a president versus a senator. We're talking here, Mike Huckabee just brought up somebody putting papers down their pants. That's the only way then Senator Joe Biden would have gotten the documents that were found in the Penn Biden Center, by stuffing them in his pants, because you're not supposed to take these documents out of a skiff.
Right. And Mike, what's remarkable about this indictment is that the DOJ, while they are trying to convict Trump of these accusations, they are at the same time laying the groundwork to exonerate Joe Biden of the exact same wrongdoing. How does the DOJ square this?
Well, they don't. I mean, Kayleigh, that's what I think is so frustrating to most Americans, and not just the Trump partisans. I think it's also pretty evident to the independent voter and to a group of fair-minded Democrats that this just doesn't make sense, and it's really hurting a sense of credibility within the Justice Department and the FBI, which in a larger sense diminishes our very system of government that we need to have confidence in and trust in, and we don't. I certainly don't. I feel like these people are playing politics and weaponizing against a person they don't like, and a whole lot of it has to do with when he went to Washington, he didn't owe the normal donor class anything. And he went in and did things that they didn't like. And they want to make sure he never gets back in that town again.
Yeah, Mike Baker.
Yeah, Mike, it's very good to see you again. And I do take exception to your reference to Sandy Berger because I myself currently have classified documents in my pants. But I just wanted to ask you if you were worried about the growing numbers for the Republican side in terms of the candidates for 2024. Does the size of that field, does that worry you?
No, I think it's a good, healthy sign that the party has a lot of people who say, I'd like to be on the team. Put me in, coach. I'm ready to play. That's good. That's fine. Now, what it probably does is make Donald Trump stronger because he owns the Donald Trump lane all by himself. And the more candidates there are in the I'm not Donald Trump lane, the more difficult it is for any one of them to emerge. And it's going to be a demolition derby over there. So I think we're going to see a very fascinating primary, as we should. That's healthy for the country and for the party.
Well, look, Senator Marsha Blackburn tried grilling the FBI on they protecting Joe Biden. But that's what we say. They won't give up that document that shows and proves a scheme to influence peddle and take money for policy decisions from Ukraine.
What we ought to be concerned about is that the FBI thinks that they have the right to withhold that document. The role of the Congress is very clear constitutionally. Yeah. They have oversight responsibility.
That's right.
And they have every right to exercise it on behalf of the American people. They were elected by the American people. Nobody at the FBI was elected by the people to do anything other than to serve people, and that includes serving the oversight responsibility of Congress.
Yeah. Mike Huckabee, thanks very much. Governor, good to see you this morning. Thank you, sir.